ZYXTAL had processed over 12,000 identification verifications in her career as a Galactic Transit Authority officer. The routine was simple. Scan the biosignature, cross-reference with the central database, stamp the travel documents, and move to the next being in line. Today felt no different as she settled into her booth at Nexus Station 7, one of the busiest interstellar hubs in the Outer Rim territories. The morning shift brought the usual suspects. Crystalline Vorthack merchants heading to the mineral-rich worlds of Sector 9, their translucent forms shimmering under the station's artificial lighting. A group of fur-covered Kalani diplomats, their whiskers twitching nervously as they discussed trade negotiations in hushed tones. Even a few rare, ethereal minds, beings of pure energy contained within specialized environmental suits, floated past her station with their characteristic blue glow. ZYXTAL's four arms worked efficiently, her primary hands operating the scanning equipment, while her secondary hands sorted through digital files and physical documents. Her species, the Morthani, were perfectly suited for administrative work. Their multiple limbs and enhanced cognitive processing made them ideal for handling the complex bureaucratic requirements of interstellar travel. The line moved steadily until a figure approached that made ZYXTAL pause. It was a human, which wasn't unusual in itself. Humans have become increasingly common in galactic society over the past few decades, though they were still considered a relatively young species by cosmic standards. What caught her attention was something different about this particular human's bearing. While most humans she'd encountered seemed eager to please, almost apologetic for taking up space in the galaxy, this one moved with quiet confidence. He was tall by human standards, probably in his 70s by their aging process, with silver-gray hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to hold secrets. His clothing was simple, but well-made, the kind of practical garments favored by those who had spent considerable time traveling between worlds. What struck ZYXTAL most was his posture. There was no nervousness, no fidgeting with documents, no anxious glancing around the busy terminal. He simply waited his turn with the patience of someone who had waited in many lines before. When he reached her station, the human placed his identification card on the scanner with practiced ease. ZYXTAL began the routine scan, expecting to see the typical human travel visa with its limited clearances and standard biographical data. Instead, her screen exploded with information that made her secondary hearts skip a beat. The clearance level was beyond anything she'd ever seen. Not just high-level diplomatic immunity or corporate executive privileges, but something that transcended normal galactic authority structures. The identification codes, reference databases she didn't even know existed. More concerning were the security flags that immediately appeared, not warning her away from the individual, but rather warning her that this person's identity was classified at levels that required special handling protocols. But it was the photograph in the file that made ZYXTAL's breathing apparatus constrict with shock. The image showed the same human, but decades younger, standing beside what appeared to be the signing of the Terran Incorporation Treaty. She recognized the ceremony from her galactic history courses. It was the moment when humanity had officially joined the Galactic Council, transforming from an isolated species to active participants in interstellar civilization. Her training kicked in as she tried to maintain professional composure, but her mind raced through the implications. The Terran Incorporation Treaty had been signed 43 years ago. The human delegation had been led by someone whose identity had become legendary in diplomatic circles, though few beings had ever seen detailed records of the proceedings. The lead negotiator had been described in historical texts as brilliant, uncompromising, and instrumental in securing terms that many had considered impossible for such a young species to achieve. ZYXTAL found herself staring at a living piece of galactic history. This wasn't just any human traveler. This was potentially one of the architects of modern human-galactic relations, someone whose decisions had shaped the political landscape of 3 sectors and influenced trade policies that affected billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. The human seemed to notice her hesitation and offered a slight smile. His voice, when he spoke, carried the accent of the Sol system, but with the refined tones of someone who had spent decades speaking multiple galactic languages. "Is there a problem with my documentation?" he asked politely, though there was something in his expression that suggested he already knew exactly what she had discovered. ZYXTAL realized she had been holding her breath. The protocols for handling beings of significant historical importance were clear, but they had always seemed like theoretical exercises during her training. She had never expected to encounter someone whose biographical file required her to notify 3 different departments of their presence on the station. Around them, the normal bustle of the transit terminal continued. Other travelers waited impatiently in line, unaware that they were in the presence of someone who had helped negotiate the very treaties that allowed them to move freely between worlds. The irony wasn't lost on ZYXTAL that one of the most influential humans in recent galactic history was standing in a routine identification line like any ordinary traveler. She looked up at him again, noting the way he waited without any sign of impatience or expectation of special treatment. Most beings of significant political importance traveled with entourages, security details, and enough advance notice to have entire stations cleared for their arrival. Yet here was someone whose influence had shaped galactic policy for decades, traveling alone with nothing but a standard identification card and what appeared to be a single piece of luggage. The weight of the moment pressed down on her as she realized she had a choice to make. She could follow standard protocols, which would involve alerting station security and likely turning this routine travel day into a complicated diplomatic event. Or she could treat him like any other traveler, respecting what appeared to be his desire for anonymity. The human continued to wait patiently, his hands clasped behind his back, observing the busy terminal with the interest of someone who found the everyday workings of galactic society genuinely fascinating. There was something almost wistful in his expression as he watched families reuniting, business beings rushing to make connections, and the constant flow of diverse species moving through the hub of interstellar civilization that he had helped create. ZYXTAL made her decision in the space of a heartbeat. She completed the standard verification process, stamped his travel documents with a routine approval seal, and handed them back across the counter. The human accepted them with a grateful nod, but as he turned to leave, something compelled her to speak. "Ambassador Chun," she said quietly, using the name she had seen in the historical files. The human stopped mid-step and turned back to face her. For the first time since approaching her station, his careful composure showed a crack of surprise. His eyes, which had seemed merely politely interested before, now focused on her with sharp intelligence. "I'm sorry, I think you have me confused with someone else," he replied, but there was no conviction in the denial. ZYXTAL leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice so that other travelers couldn't overhear. "Ambassador David Chun, Chief Negotiator for the Terran Incorporation Treaty. Your photograph is in the classified sections of the historical database. I studied your work during my advanced certification training." Chen's shoulders seemed to relax slightly, as if he had been carrying a weight that could finally be acknowledged. He glanced around the busy terminal, then back at her with what appeared to be resignation mixed with curiosity. "That was a long time ago," he said simply, "and I'm just a tourist these days." "The Kalani Accords," ZYXTAL continued, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "You convinced 7 different species to accept humans as equal partners in the mining consortium. No one thought it was possible. My professor said it was the most masterful display of diplomatic negotiation in the past century." A genuine smile crossed Chen's weathered features. "Your professor was being generous. The Kalani were actually quite reasonable once we got past the initial territorial posturing. They just needed to understand that humans weren't interested in displacement politics. But the resource allocation formulas you proposed," ZYXTAL pressed on, her professional training warring with her excitement at meeting a living legend. "The mathematical models that ensured fair distribution based on technological contribution rather than species hierarchy. That framework is still being used in trade negotiations across 4 sectors." Chun chuckled, a sound that held decades of experience with complex negotiations and difficult compromises. Mathematics doesn't lie, and it doesn't care about who has more tentacles or better technology. Every species brings something valuable to the table if you look hard enough. Behind them, the line was growing longer, and Zhuaixtao could see other travelers beginning to show signs of impatience. Her supervisor will be making rounds soon, and she couldn't afford to hold up the verification process for too long. Yet she found herself reluctant to end this unexpected conversation. "I have to ask," she said, processing the next traveler's documents while continuing to speak to Chun. "Why are you traveling alone? I mean, someone of your stature could arrange private transportation, diplomatic escorts, the full protocols." Chun shrugged, watching as she efficiently handled the routine verification of a crystalline merchant's travel papers. Protocols have their place, but you miss a lot when you're insulated from the real galaxy. Some of my best insights came from conversations in places like this, watching how the systems we built actually work in practice. The merchant moved on, and Chin stepped slightly to the side to allow the next traveler to approach, but he didn't leave. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in observing Zhuaixtao's work process. He continued, "When we were negotiating the transit authority frameworks, we spent months debating the balance between security and accessibility. I always wondered how it would feel from the officer's perspective, being the practical implementation of all those theoretical policies." Zhuaixtao found herself working more consciously, aware that someone who had helped design the very systems she operated was watching her use them. "It's mostly routine," she admitted, scanning a Vorthack diplomat's biosignature. "But sometimes you get cases that make you think about the bigger picture, like when you have to decide whether to follow the letter of the law or the spirit of it. That's exactly the kind of practical wisdom that politicians and negotiators often miss," Chen observed. "We can write all the policies we want, but the real decisions happen right here in booths like this when individual officers have to make judgment calls." The Vorthack moved through, and Chun glanced at the growing line. "I should let you get back to work. Thank you for the professional courtesy, Officer Zhuaixtao." She realized he had read her name badge, but more than that, he had thanked her for treating him like any other traveler rather than creating a diplomatic incident. There was something deeply human about that gratitude, she thought. Most high-ranking beings expected special treatment as their due. "Ambassador," she called out as he began to turn away again. "May I ask where you're traveling? I mean, if it's not classified." Chun paused, seeming to consider his answer carefully. "Kepler Station in the Centauri system. There's a memorial service I need to attend." Something in his tone suggested this wasn't just any memorial service, and Zhuaixtao felt a chill of understanding. Kepler Station had been the site of the first successful human-alien joint colonization project, but it had also been the location of the tragic accident that had killed several diplomats from multiple species during the early years of the Terran integration process. "The annual remembrance," she said softly, recognizing the significance. Chen nodded gravely. "Some obligations transcend retirement. The families of those who died deserve to know that their sacrifices aren't forgotten, especially by those of us who made the decisions that put them in danger." With that sobering statement, he offered a final respectful nod and walked toward the departure gates. Zhuaixtao watched him go, noting how he moved through the crowd with the same unassuming confidence she had observed earlier. Other travelers parted around him naturally, unaware they were sharing space with someone whose diplomatic achievements had literally shaped the galaxy they now moved through so freely. As the next being in line approached her station, Zhuaixtao found herself thinking about the weight of history and the strange way it could intersect with ordinary moments. In her years of routine verification work, she had processed the documents of countless travelers, but she had never expected to have a casual conversation with someone whose decisions had influenced the lives of billions across multiple star systems. The realization that legends could walk through ordinary transit lines, carrying their own luggage, and waiting patiently like everyone else, somehow made the galaxy feel both smaller and more wonderful than she had imagined. 3 hours after Ambassador Chun had disappeared into the departure gates, Zhuai Extal's routine was interrupted by an urgent communication that made her primary hearts race. Her supervisor, a stern Morthani named Keldron, appeared at her station with an expression that could only mean serious trouble. "Officer Zhuai Extal," he said in a formal tone reserved for significant problems, "you are to report to station security immediately. Your shift will be covered by Officer Threne K." The walk to the security office felt longer than usual, despite Zhuai Extal's familiarity with every corridor in the station. Her mind raced through possible explanations. Had she made an error in documentation? Had she missed something important in one of the verification scans? The timing, so soon after her encounter with Ambassador Chun, couldn't be coincidental. The security office was bustling with activity that seemed far beyond the normal level for a routine day. Multiple species were present, including several beings wearing the distinctive insignia of Galactic Council intelligence. Zhuai Extal recognized the silver and blue uniforms that indicated these weren't just local security personnel, but officers who typically handle matters of interstellar significance. Director Vexmani, the station's chief security officer, gestured for her to sit at a conference table where 3 other beings were already waiting. A Kalani intelligence officer, her fur perfectly groomed and her whiskers twitching with barely contained energy. A human council representative, whose presence immediately confirmed Zhuai Extal's fears about the connection to her earlier encounter. And, most intimidating of all, an ethereal mind whose energy form shifted between blue and purple in patterns that indicated deep concentration. "Officer Zhuai Extal," Director Vexmani began, "we need to discuss your interaction with the individual who presented identification under the name David Chun approximately 3 hours ago." Zhuai Extal's stomach clenched. She had followed proper procedures, hadn't she? The verification had been completed correctly, the documentation properly stamped. Yet clearly, something about the encounter had triggered significant attention from multiple intelligence agencies. The human representative, a middle-aged woman with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, leaned forward. "We understand you recognized this individual and engaged in conversation beyond the standard verification protocols. We need a complete account of everything that was discussed." "I want to be clear," Director Vexmani added quickly, seeing Extal's expression, "you are not under suspicion of wrongdoing. However, the individual in question is of significant interest to several galactic security agencies, and any information about his current activities could be extremely important." The Kalani officer spoke up, her voice carrying the slight whistle characteristic of her species. "The being you encountered has been missing from all official channel for the past 6 months. His sudden appearance at this station, traveling under standard documentation rather than diplomatic protocols, has raised questions about his intentions and destinations." Zhuai Extal felt a wave of relief that she wasn't in trouble, followed immediately by concern for Ambassador Chun. Missing? But he seemed completely normal, just like any other traveler. He was polite, patient, and didn't ask for any special treatment. The ethereal mind's energy pattern shifted to indicate it was speaking, its thoughts translated through the communication device attached to its environmental suit. That behavior pattern is consistent with someone attempting to avoid detection. Did he indicate his purpose for travel or express any concerns about being recognized? He mentioned he was traveling to Kepler Station for a memorial service. Zhuai Extal replied carefully. He called it the annual remembrance. When I recognized him from historical records, he seemed resigned rather than alarmed. He didn't try to deny his identity once I called him by name. The human representative exchanged glances with the Kalani officer. The annual remembrance ceremony was canceled 2 months ago due to security concerns. There have been threats against several former diplomats who were involved in the early integration treaties. A chill ran through Zhuai Extal's system as she processed this information. "You think he's walking into a trap?" "We think," the ethereal mind responded, "that he may be aware of the dangers and choosing to face them anyway. Ambassador Chun has a documented history of placing principle above personal safety. The question is whether he's acting on information we don't have, or whether he's making a decision based on incomplete intelligence. Director Vexmani pulled up a holographic display showing the galactic transit networks. His travel route is indirect, involving 3 transfers through secondary stations. That could indicate either careful route planning to avoid detection, or simply the travel pattern of someone using civilian rather than diplomatic transport. He specifically mentioned feeling responsible for those who died, ZYXTAL offered. He said the families deserve to know their sacrifices weren't forgotten, especially by those who made the decisions that put them in danger. It sounded very personal. The Kalani officer's whiskers twitched more rapidly. Personal guilt could make someone ignore rational security assessments. If Ambassador Chan believes he bears responsibility for those deaths, he might feel obligated to attend the memorial regardless of personal risk. The problem, the human representative continued, is that we've lost track of him in the system. His identification credentials are legitimate, but they're routing through diplomatic channels that our standard monitoring can't penetrate. We know he boarded a transport to the Vega system 3 hours ago, but after that, his trail goes dark. ZYXTAL realized they were asking for her help not just in understanding what had happened, but in predicting what might happen next. He seemed very knowledgeable about the systems. When he was watching me work, he talked about the balance between security and accessibility in the transit authority frameworks. He understood how the practical implementation works. That knowledge could help him navigate around standard security protocols, the ethereal mind observed. Someone who helped design the systems would know their limitations and potential vulnerabilities. The human representative stood up and began pacing, her movements sharp with frustration. David Chun is one of the most respected figures in modern galactic diplomacy. His disappearance has already caused significant concern in council circles. If something happens to him, especially if it's connected to his role in the integration treaties, it could destabilize decades of carefully built relationships. But more than that, the Kalani officer added, her voice carrying genuine emotion. He's someone who deserves protection. His work made peaceful coexistence possible for billions of beings. The irony of him being targeted for those very achievements is not lost on any of us. Director Vexmani looked directly at ZYXTAL. We need to understand his mindset. From your conversation with him, what did you sense about his emotional state? Did he seem like someone who had accepted personal risk, or someone who was unaware of potential dangers? ZYXTAL considered the question carefully, replaying the encounter in her memory. He seemed peaceful but determined, like someone who had made a difficult decision and was at peace with the consequences. When he talked about obligations that transcend retirement, there was weight behind those words. I don't think he was unaware of risks. I think he had decided they were worth taking. The room fell silent as the implications of that assessment settled over the assembled officers. They weren't dealing with someone who had stumbled into danger, but someone who had walked toward it with open eyes and clear purpose. The emergency response that followed ZYXTAL's debriefing moved with the kind of coordinated precision that only came from years of interspecies cooperation. Within hours, a joint task force had been assembled, drawing resources from the Galactic Council Intelligence Service, Human Diplomatic Security, and several allied species law enforcement agencies. ZYXTAL found herself in the unusual position of being temporarily reassigned to the investigation team. Her direct interaction with Ambassador Chun, combined with her professional knowledge of transit systems, made her a valuable asset in understanding his likely movements and motivations. It was the first time in her career that her routine administrative work had intersected with galactic security matters. The task force had established a temporary command center in one of the station's secure conference rooms, where multiple holographic displays showed real-time intelligence feeds from across 3-star systems. The main screen displayed a 3-dimensional map of possible travel routes from Nexus Station 7 to Kepler Station, with probability assessments for each pathway based on Chen's documented preferences and behavioral patterns. Commander Sarah Martinez, the human diplomatic security chief, had arrived on the next available transport. She was a compact woman with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing, carrying herself with the efficiency of someone who had spent decades protecting important people in dangerous situations. Ambassador Chun has always been independently minded, she explained to the assembled team. Even during his active diplomatic service, he preferred minimal security details and often insisted on personally scouting locations before major negotiations. He believes that understanding the real conditions on the ground makes him a better negotiator. The Kalani intelligence officer, who had introduced herself as Senior Analyst Thrixal, consulted her data pad. Our sources in the Centauri system confirm that the official memorial ceremony was indeed canceled, but we've detected increased chatter among extremist groups about a reckoning plan for the original ceremony date. The language suggests they may be planning something targeting former treaty negotiators. What kind of extremist groups? Zhuaixtao asked, still learning to navigate the complexities of galactic politics. An ethereal mind that had been introduced as senior investigator Luxion responded through its translator device. Anti-integration factions. These are beings from various species who oppose the inclusion of humans in galactic society and continue to view the integration treaties as a mistake. They've been largely marginalized over the decades, but recent political tensions have given them renewed energy. Commander Martinez's expression darkened. David helped negotiate agreements that brought unprecedented prosperity and cooperation to dozens of worlds. The idea that he might be targeted for that work is exactly the kind of irony that would motivate him to take personal risks rather than hide behind security protocols. The main display updated with new information as tracking algorithms process transportation records across multiple systems. A pattern began to emerge, showing a series of travelers using different identification credentials, but following similar routes toward the Centauri system. The behavioral analysis suggested coordinated movement rather than coincidence. "We have a problem," announced the station's intelligence coordinator, a Vorthack named Crystalline Pattern 7. The individuals following these routes don't match any known diplomatic or security personnel assigned to the Centauri system. Their documentation is legitimate, but their travel histories are inconsistent with their stated purposes. Commander Martinez studied the data streams with growing alarm. This looks like a convergence pattern. Multiple actors moving toward the same general area, but maintaining separation to avoid detection. If this is coordinated, it suggests a level of planning and resources that goes beyond typical extremist capabilities. Senior Analyst Thrixal's whiskers twitched rapidly as she processed additional intelligence reports. "There's something else. We've detected unusual financial transactions involving several accounts linked to historical opponents of the integration treaties. Large amounts of currency have been moved through anonymous channels, suggesting someone with significant resources is funding this operation." The implications hung heavy in the air. What had initially appeared to be a security concern about one missing diplomat was revealing itself to be a much larger conspiracy. Ambassador Chun might be walking into a carefully planned trap that involved multiple species and substantial financial backing. "The question," said Senior Investigator Luxon, "is whether Ambassador Chun is aware of the scope of what he's walking into. His diplomatic experience would give him insights into the political undercurrents, but he might not realize how organized the opposition has become." Zhuaixtao found herself thinking back to her conversation with the ambassador, trying to recall any subtle clues she might have missed. When he talked about the memorial service, he mentioned obligations and responsibility, but he also seemed very aware of the weight of his decisions. "I got the impression he understood the risks better than he was letting on." "That's consistent with his personality profile," Commander Martinez confirmed. "David has always been someone who takes calculated risks rather than reckless ones. If he's proceeding despite obvious dangers, he probably has reasons we don't understand yet." The tactical display updated again, showing real-time positions of various assets converging on the Centauri system. Several Council security vessels have been quietly repositioned to provide rapid response capabilities, while intelligence operatives worked to identify the individuals following suspicious travel patterns. "We need to consider," said Crystalline Pattern 7, that Ambassador Chun might be intentionally drawing these threats into the open. His presence at the memorial site could be designed to force a confrontation under circumstances where he has some advantage. Or, added senior analyst Thrixal grimly, he's decided that the symbolic importance of attending the memorial outweighs his personal safety. Either way, we need to be prepared for multiple scenarios. Commander Martinez turned to address the full task force. We have approximately 18 hours before the scheduled memorial time. Our primary objective is to ensure Ambassador Chen's safety, but we also need to be prepared to deal with whatever conspiracy is unfolding around him. The political implications of this situation extend far beyond one person's welfare. ZYX realized that her routine morning of processing travel documents had somehow led to her being involved in events that could affect the stability of interstellar civilization. The ambassador she had met seemed so ordinary, so unassuming, yet his actions were rippling outward to involve multiple governments and security agencies. "There's one more thing," she said, as the team prepared to implement their response plans. When Ambassador Chun was watching me work, he seemed genuinely interested in how the systems functioned in practice. He mentioned that some of his best insights had come from conversations in transit stations, watching how the policies they'd created actually worked in the real galaxy. Commander Martinez paused in her planning to look at ZYX directly. "What are you thinking? Maybe his route to Kepler Station isn't just about avoiding detection or walking into danger," ZYX suggested. "Maybe he's gathering information along the way, using his travel time to understand something about the current state of galactic society that he needs to know before he acts." The possibility that Ambassador Chun was conducting his own intelligence mission while appearing to be a simple traveler added another layer of complexity to an already intricate situation. As the task force prepared to deploy across multiple star systems, they faced the challenge of protecting someone who might not want to be protected, while uncovering a conspiracy that threatened the foundations of galactic cooperation. The climax of the crisis unfolded not in the violent confrontation that everyone had feared, but in a moment of diplomatic brilliance that reminded the galaxy why Ambassador Chun had become legendary in the first place. ZYX watched the events unfold from the Task Force Command Center, where real-time feeds from Kepler Station showed Ambassador Chun arriving at the memorial site exactly as scheduled. He appeared alone, carrying only a simple bouquet of flowers from Earth, walking with the same unhurried confidence she had observed during their brief encounter. What the surveillance feeds revealed, however, was far more complex than a single individual paying respects to fallen colleagues. The Memorial Plaza had become the focal point for the largest gathering of anti-integration extremists seen in decades. Representatives from 17 different species had converged on the site, their presence creating a volatile mixture of old grievances and contemporary political tensions. "This is either the worst security nightmare imaginable," Commander Martinez observed grimly, "or the most sophisticated piece of diplomatic theater ever staged." The answer became clear as Ambassador Chun approached the memorial monument. Instead of simply laying his flowers and departing, he began to speak, not in any formal diplomatic language, but in the common trade tongue that served as the lingua franca for most interstellar commerce. His words were picked up by the station's public address system, carrying across the plaza where hundreds of beings had gathered. 43 years ago, Chun began, his voice carrying despite his age, representatives from dozens of species came together to build something unprecedented. Not just a treaty, not just an alliance, but a genuine attempt to create a civilization where different forms of life could coexist and prosper together. Senior analyst Thrixal translated the crowd's reactions as Chun continued speaking. The extremist factions are confused. They expected either a private ceremony they could disrupt or a heavily secured official event they could protest. Instead, they're witnessing something that doesn't fit their prepared narratives. Chen's speech continued, and ZYX found herself riveted by the way he addressed the gathered crowd. He spoke directly to the grievances that had motivated the anti-integration movements, acknowledging the legitimate concerns about cultural preservation economic displacement, and loss of species autonomy that had driven opposition to human inclusion in galactic society. But here's what we learned, Chun said, gesturing toward the memorial stones that bore names from multiple species. Isolation doesn't preserve cultures. It fossilizes them. The beings we honor here died, not because of integration, but because they were brave enough to believe that cooperation was worth the risk of change. The surveillance feeds showed something remarkable happening in the crowd. Arguments were breaking out, not between security forces and extremists, but among the extremists themselves. Chen's words were forcing them to confront the gap between their abstract political positions and the concrete reality of what galactic cooperation had actually achieved. He's doing exactly what he did during the original treaty negotiations. Commander Martinez realized with something approaching awe. He's not arguing against their positions. He's reframing the entire conversation, making them question their own assumptions rather than defending his. Senior investigator Luxion's energy pattern indicated deep concentration as it processed the psychological dynamics playing out in the plaza. The extremist groups came here expecting to confront a symbol of what they oppose. Instead, they're encountering someone who validates their concerns while challenging their conclusions. It's causing cognitive dissonance that undermines their certainty. As Chen's impromptu speech continued, the task force monitors detected something unexpected. Several of the identified extremist operatives were leaving the plaza, their coordinated movement patterns breaking down as individuals made independent decisions about how to respond to what they were witnessing. The conspiracy is fracturing, reported Crystalline Pattern 7. The financial backing and organizational structure we identified appears to have been based on the assumption that their target would either hide from confrontation or respond with force. They weren't prepared for philosophical engagement. Chun concluded his remarks by placing his flowers at the base of the memorial, then doing something that surprised everyone watching. He sat down on a nearby bench and waited, making himself available for conversation with anyone who wanted to approach him. What followed was a series of one-on-one discussions between Chun and various members of the gathered crowd. The surveillance audio picked up fragments of conversations that revealed the true depth of his understanding of galactic politics. He spoke with a Kalani traditionalist about preserving ancient hunting rituals in an industrialized society. He engaged a Vorthack economist in a detailed discussion about trade balance inequalities that had resulted from rapid integration. He listened to an ethereal mind's concerns about the homogenization of consciousness patterns in multi-species communities. "This is remarkable," Zwiechtal observed, watching the interactions. He's treating each conversation like a diplomatic negotiation, but he's not trying to win arguments. He's trying to understand perspectives. Commander Martinez nodded slowly. This is what made him so effective during the integration negotiations. He never approached diplomacy as a zero-sum competition. He genuinely believed that understanding different viewpoints made everyone's position stronger. As the hours passed, the character of the gathering at the Memorial Plaza transformed completely. What had begun as a potential confrontation between security forces and extremist groups evolved into something resembling a spontaneous diplomatic conference. Beings who had traveled to Kepler Station with destructive intentions found themselves engaged in productive conversations about complex political and social issues. The financial conspiracy that had funded the convergence of extremist groups began to unravel as the philosophical foundations of their movement were challenged. Several key organizers were identified and quietly arrested by local authorities, but the majority of the gathered individuals simply chose to leave on their own, their certainty about the rightness of their cause shaken by exposure to nuanced perspectives. By the time the official memorial period concluded, Ambassador Chun had accomplished something that formal diplomatic channels had failed to achieve for decades. He had created a space for honest dialogue between mainstream galactic society and its critics, allowing both sides to recognize the validity of concerns that had previously been dismissed or demonized. The final irony, the Waxtao reflected as she watched Chen board his return transport, is that he accomplished more by appearing vulnerable and available than he could have with any amount of security or official protocols. Commander Martinez smiled for the first time since the crisis began. That's vintage David Chun. He's always understood that the best defense against extremism is not force, but conversation. Today he reminded everyone why humans earned their place in galactic civilization, not through superior technology or military power, but through their willingness to engage with complexity and uncertainty. As ZYXTAL prepared to return to her normal duties at Nexus Station 7, she carried with her a deeper appreciation for the weight that ordinary moments could bear. Her brief conversation with a traveler during routine identification verification had led to witnessing one of the most significant diplomatic achievements in recent galactic history. The lesson wasn't lost on her that in a galaxy of billions of beings moving constantly between worlds, the most important conversations often happened in the most unexpected places between individuals who took the time to recognize each other's humanity, regardless of the species they belonged to. Ambassador Chen's journey had begun and ended with routine transit procedures, but what occurred between those ordinary moments demonstrated why some individuals become legends not through grand gestures, but through their consistent commitment to treating every encounter as an opportunity for understanding and growth.